how science has impacted my practice as an oncologist and a researcher, and where I think we are and why I think we've learned a great deal. And also I want to point out at the end where the limitations are in what I'm about to tell you. What I'm about to tell you is a product of a kind of man striving for mastery over random fate and chaos in effect, and man has made many strides in that regard, some of which are spectacular and living proof, at least for me, when I look after people with life-threatening diseases. But it hasn't solved every problem. And we need to recognise, I think, we actually depend upon knowing what we don't know, and that in itself is a very challenging thing. I'm an oncologist that treats rare sets of diseases called sarcomas. These are cancers that affect the connective tissues. They have a lethality of between 50 and 60%, and in some cases up to 90-95%. And every day I look after people who are dying, in essence. So for me, this problem of cancer, which is a very ancient thing, you can see here that these are not theoretical problems that we have to deal with. So the first thing, I guess, I'd like to reinforce is how ancient and how fundamental a malady cancer is. It kills 1 in 3 people in our community today, affects 40%, 2 in 5. And there is, I understand from reading through some of the evidence in this regard, that there's evidence from Leakey's excavations of anthropoid skeletons in the Rift Valley, evidence of tumours as early back as tens of thousands of years ago. But mummies have been identified that have cancers in them. And it was a problem that, this is Hippocrates, of course, the father of modern Western medicine, who sort of contributed towards understanding and thinking about problems and structuring a way of thinking about human illness. And I think that's a very important thing to appreciate about Western medicine is it works empirically. Classifications, ideas only have value to the extent that they help people. There are plenty of ideas that people create that may have no value or may have no relevance to practice, but the most useful things are tested over time and prove themselves to be of value. And I think it's a very important principle. So the first age of cancer that I want to talk to you about is essentially thousands of years old. It's the anatomic concept of cancer, and this is Andreas Vesalius, an anatomist from Renaissance and pre-Renaissance Italy, who for the first time started to pull apart corpses to define natural anatomy and also morbid anatomy. This is John Hunter, an English physician in the 18th century, who first applied these classifications of anatomic origins of tumours. And this is William Halsted, an American surgeon, who developed the consequence, a practical indication of that anatomic classification of cancer, built upon a simple matter of simply identifying anatomic structures which, believe me, weren't actually evident at the time that Vesalius started these studies. And this is a breast cancer, and William Halsted's development of the mastectomy has saved countless lives. In fact, I would say that the utility of this anatomic classification of cancer is with us today. In fact, I suspect, and I expect for the next coming future, no matter what I'm about to tell you next about the advance of modern medicine, simple anatomic definitions of cancer and surgical management are going to be the way that we manage to cure most people from these life-threatening diseases. That lasted until about the middle of the 18th to the 19th century. In the middle of the 16th and 17th centuries, the light microscope, or some equivalent of it that enabled looking at cells or organisms or even microscopic structures of any kind, was developed. This is Malpighi, a scientist who was involved with the development of the early microscope. And this is a really important message, because we're limited by our ability to see things, to understand things, to physically imagine them, and to demonstrate things that our eyes can't teach us. And by looking through the prism of this particular device, the German pathologists of the middle of the 19th century, and this is Rudolf Virchow. Virchow is a famous giant figure in modern medicine. He was a pathologist, and looking through a microscope, he was able to see these things called cells, giving rise to the concept of a cellular basis of cancer, as opposed to the anatomic. It's not a lump in a mass, it's now a lump that's composed of these lovely cells that he drew here. And this is an example of a sarcoma that we use. We use histological techniques that essentially use the same technologies to classify cancers information to decide upon treatments, and that has turned out to be surprisingly useful. This Latin saying was one he developed, that is, all cells are derived from other cells, which connotes the idea that cells divide, multiply, and expand, and their expansion in an uncontrolled way actually gives rise to cancer. And that's a fundamental way that we think about cancer, even to this day. For example, as a sarcoma clinician, if I see a picture like this, I know that the person is unlikely to respond to a certain type of chemotherapy. You might say, well, chemotherapies, they don't always work in many cases, but there are other types of patterns that we see under the microscope. For example, Ewing sarcoma, where we can completely eradicate the cancer with chemotherapy. So, referring back to the concept of classifications only being useful to the extent that they make a difference to people, this particular, looking down the microscope at the artwork that underpins cancers, turned out for the past 150 years, really up until the current day, to be an incredibly useful way of moving forward. This is James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953, after the publication of this fundamental paper in the prestigious journal Nature. And what they did, this structure behind them was actually a physical model of DNA, and the structure of the double helix is described here. I show this because it illustrates some important, subtle point about Western medicine and science. That is, the building up of data that turns out to have some consequence for people, empirically tested without any assumptions about theories underpinning them, the theories having no value except to the extent that they empirically produce benefits. In this particular case, this structure, which was observed by X-ray crystallography on a piece of film, was deduced by these extremely brilliant men and their partners, Maurice Wilkins and Rosalind Franklin, who Wilkins, Crick and Watson received the Nobel Prize in the 1960s for this discovery of DNA, probably the most important discovery in cancer in the past 100 years or more. But Rosalind Franklin died of ovarian cancer in the late 1950s and never received the prize, but in fact has been argued to be have been neglected. And cancer is fundamentally a genetic disease, so the understanding of how genes are made is really important. It had been known since the all that cancer's clustered in families, and this is a German family by a guy called Waltham, published in 1911. This is an extension, a report, another 20 years later in the American Journal of Cancer. You can see the black dots are in this family, all the cancers. And we know that cancers affect, breast cancer affects women in families, but it's true to say that the genetics of cancer actually apply to everybody, including everybody in this room. Everybody in this room has a different risk of getting cancer. And the development of genetic technologies that allow you to deconvolute what had previously been such an incredibly complex problem and reduce it down to analysable detail has enabled us to start to begin the process of identifying who is at risk and who is not. And why is that important? Because of evidence that makes a difference. So this is data published in 2003 in The Lancet showing the effect of screening on cancer deaths from breast cancer in the English community compared to previous decades prior to screening. Now, this sort of screening is best conducted on people at high risk because they have the biggest benefit. And you can see all the advances over the preceding 20 years in other types of treatments, whereas nothing by comparison with the ability to detect the cancer when the surgeon could remove it. And similarly, there's data about reducing cancer deaths from colorectal cancer by screening of blood in the stool and using drugs like aspirin, a product of a natural product that almost everybody in this community uses, which is currently the study of one of the largest randomized studies globally to see what general health benefits it brings. Well, one of the benefits it brings is reducing the risk of colorectal cancer. So it makes a difference. Detecting things early and knowing who is at risk allows us to choose who we can protect, where we should be putting our efforts, and who should be sustaining the risks of preventive strategies. And then there's this deconvolution of the cancer genome itself. This is a bizarre way of representing it, but people who work in genetics look at cancer and they can see this extraordinary degree of rearrangement amongst the chromosomes. And that's fundamentally this evolution of cancer from normal cells as it grows out to sustain all these bizarre rearrangements. It turns out to have important clinical implications. This is a patient with metastatic melanoma, an incredible burden of disease. This is the normal brain, but everything else there is more or less cancer, apart from a little bit of tracer in the bladder. And they were treated on the basis of a molecular defect in the tumour, something we could detect by genetic screening with a drug called vemurafenib, and the tumour's completely dissolved. And I can tell you, I saw Grant MacArthur, who is down at Peter Mac as a melanoma specialist, walking out of clinic with his jaw open at seeing these first responses. These are miracles. I mean, it's not too strong to say that science and a rational belief that one can exploit the detailed knowledge of science has transformed some people's lives. Not everybody, not enough, but it's a long journey and a long way to go. But it's evidence that over time, this scientific approach, this Western medicine approach, that empirically tests things and discards what doesn't work and tries to develop what does work, is a fundamental principle behind Western medicine. And just to show you that in more tangible, evidence-based detail, this is data from the Cancer Research UK showing the survival in 1970-71, 10-year survival from cancer has doubled from 25 to 50% as a consequence of the era of modern medicine, clinical trials, many, many things, but also including the impact of genomics. Not everywhere, but in some cases in a spectacular way. Now, I want to finish off with the limitations. Medicine, Western medicine works by focusing more and more upon the detail and sometimes neglecting the person. And what does it matter when you have these marvellous drugs but people can't afford it? What does that matter from a social justice point of view? What does it matter when in Papua New Guinea women between 20 and 40 are dying from cervical cancer, which is a disease which is preventable with vaccination? These things are broader issues that that expand out from the centre, from the molecule where we're focusing and making such an impact, to considering what happens when you can't treat somebody's cancer and they are dying, and you have nothing left to say about treatments that will prolong life. But then there's a role for medicine in trying to look after the person, and I think that's where complementary medicine, panning out from the molecule towards the individual and acknowledging that in the end, the cancer only wins if it dominates their lives. Even if the person succumbs to cancer eventually, it's not about the cancer, it's about the person. The cancer is simply a challenge that they face that we are supposed to be helping. And I think medicine and science is very frequently silent on those very important issues. And I guess that's what